The parable uses the Greek Petra and Hebrew as the loan word and identifies Abraham as the Petra upon which the Lord founded the world. The parable is so similar to Matthew chapter 16, verse 18 that the two texts must be related. In what way is the disciple Simon Peter the Petra foundation of the Master's assembly? Rabbi Lichtenstein explains that Peter was the first to proclaim Messiah to the Jewish people and the first to proclaim the gospel to the Gentiles. Peter founded the first community in Jerusalem with his teachings, and he was likewise the apostle to the circumcised, that is, to the Jewish people. He also laid the foundation for the work among the Gentiles at the house of Cornelius, the church. The Master declared, upon this rock I will build my ecclesia. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Christians might be surprised to learn that the word ecclesia does not literally mean church, and it doesn't. Church has just been thrown in there. And that the Bible actually has no word equivalent to our English word church. Ecclesia translates the biblical Hebrew word kahal. Kahal means assembly, congregation, or community, and that's what it absolutely means. That's why I put assembly at the end of Soldiers Alike Christian Assembly, not church. Because there's not, church is actually a pagan word, and it'll probably prove that here in a second. Ecclesia translates the biblical Hebrew, and that the Bible actually has no word equivalent to our English word church. Ecclesia translates the biblical Hebrew word kahal. Kahal means assembly, congregation, or community. The word ecclesia is interchangeable with synagogue, and it appears hundreds of times in the Bible to describe the congregation of the people of Israel. For example, the Bible calls the children of Israel in the wilderness the assembly, and it often refers to the people participating in a temple service as the assembly. The Torah refers to the children of Israel as the assembly of Israel. From a Jewish perspective, the assembly of the Messiah will be the renewed nation of Israel, restored and gathered in from exile. Rabbi Yeshua, Jesus, used the word only twice, and in both instances he used it in reference to the administration of the kingdom community. By translating the term as church, our English Bibles have done us the great disservice of making us think of the church as an entity different, distinct, and outside of Judaism and the Jewish people, which it shouldn't be distinct like that. The church is not a New Testament innovation, and it's not. When we read the word church in our English Bibles, we need to remember that it denotes the Messianic community within the larger Jewish nation, if not the entire nation of Israel, not something outside of it. The gates of Hades. Upon this rock I will build my community, and the gates of Sheol will not overpower it. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. The Master declared that the gates of Hades will not overcome his assembly. Several points require clarification. Gates are a defensive structure. Gates do not overcome anything. Rather, they are overcome or not overcome. The gates of Hades will not stand up against the Master's assembly. But why would the assembly of Messiah be attempting to get into Hades? Hades is a Greek term for a mythological underworld of the dead, but Septuagint Greek used it only as a translation for the Hebrew Sheol. If we think in terms of Hades or hell as the capital city of Satan's kingdom of darkness, wherein his demons live and torture the souls of the deceased, we have accidentally borrowed the mythological Greek images. The Hebrew Sheol does not have satanic connotations at all. Instead, the Bible uses Sheol as a term for the place of the dead, a synonym for the grave. And Greg's right in this. In a Jewish reading of Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, Sheol means nothing more than the grave, a poetic way of speaking of the confines of death. For example, consider Isaiah chapter 38, verse 10, where King Hezekiah begs God to spare his life as he laments, "In the middle of my life I am to enter the gates of Sheol. I am to be deprived of the rest of my years." The gates of Sheol are the gates of the grave, the metaphoric passage between life and death. The gates keep those inside them dead, so to speak. Rabbi Yeshua says that those gates will not be able to withstand his assembly. His assembly will overcome the grave, break through the gates of death, and return to life. Amen. Glory be to God. We don't have to live in those graves. We can be with in the Gan Eden, Gan Edon, Garden of Eden. Keys to the kingdom. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. The master gave Simon Peter the keys to the kingdom. These are not literal keys. To possess a key is to possess the authority over that which the key unlocks. By giving Simon Peter the keys to the kingdom, he invited him with authority over entrance into the Messianic era and assembly of the Messiah. In some sense, Peter has the authority to unlock the entrance to the kingdom. The popular folk image of St. Peter receiving souls at the gates of heaven arises from this passage. In the prelude to the Sermon on the Mount, the Master indicated that those whose righteousness does not exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees will not enter the kingdom. Those who do not heed his words, those who do not do the will of his Father in heaven. What's his will? It's not just the Ten Commandments. Need to study. Will find themselves locked outside the kingdom. In that regard, the keys to the kingdom must be the Master's teaching, the repentance message of the gospel. By giving Peter the keys to the kingdom, he entrusted him with the transmission of his teachings about entering the kingdom. Some relationship to Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22 seems likely. Then I will set the key of the house of David in his shoulder, on his shoulder. When he opens, no one will shut. When he opens, no one will shut. When he shuts, no one will open. Rabbinic literature interpreted Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22, with reference to the authority of the teachers of Torah. And this one opens a discussion of Torah to fulfill that which is said in Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22. When he opens, no one will shut. And when he shuts, no one will open. Sephra, Deuteronomy 3:21. In this regard, the keys to the house of David might represent the power to teach authoritatively, to open and close arguments of Torah, and make final decisions. The Master invested Peter with the authority of speaking on his behalf, transmitting and interpreting his teaching. Just as the sages transmitted and interpreted legal codes, he gave his chief disciple, and by extension all the disciples, administrative and legal authority over his assembly to apply his teachings. Just as in the Messianic era, they will sit upon 12 thrones, judging over the 12 tribes. He accorded them the authority to make decisions on behalf of his assembly in the current age. In this sense, the keys to the kingdom of heaven represent stewardship over the Master's words and authority to make legal decisions, specifically as they might bear on the teaching on the Master in regard to the community of Yeshua's followers. Implicit in such authority, it's the power to bind and loose. The power to bind and loose. It's not like you think it is. Listen. And all that you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven, and all that you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. Matthew chapter 16, verse 19. The Master told his chief disciples, and by extension all the disciples, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. Charismatic Christians have sometimes understood the power to bind and loose as the power to bind and loose evil spirits in spiritual warfare. It's not what it's talking about. Early Jewish magical texts do contain this kind of language, but the interpretation ignores the plain and well-known rabbinic meaning of the same terms. When the rabbis needed to decide an issue of halakha law, they argued whether to bind asar or to loose. Shitur, a particular act or deed. To bind means to forbid. To loose means to permit. To avoid confusion, the DAG translates these Hebrew terms directly as forbidding and permitting. The Torah vested the power to bind, forbid, and loose, permit in the Sanhedrin, the priesthood, and judges over Israel. For example, regarding the question of whether one could carry an object on the Sabbath outside of a private domain, the sages bound, that is to say, they forbid people from doing so. Regarding the question of whether one could dig through rubble, carrying massive amounts of debris in order to rescue survivors from a collapsed building on the Sabbath, the sages loosed it, that is to say, they permitted it. The terms to bind and to loose, forbid and permit, appear literally thousands of times in the Mishnah, Talmud, and rabbinic literature. A few examples will illustrate the point. Rav binds, Shemuel looses, Shabbat 59b. The sages claim in Judea they did work on the eve of Passover until midday, but in Galilee they did not work at all on the eve of Passover. The night before, the house of Shammai binds from work, while the house of Hillel looses it until daybreak. B. Pashkim 55a. Are we to understand that he loosens what he previously bound, or are we to understand that he both looses what he had previously bound and binds what he had loosened? B. Gittin 82d. He said to them, why do you declare clean when I declare unclean? Why do you loose when I bind? B. Barachot 63a. Our rabbis taught if one asked a ruling from a sage and he declared something unclean, he should not consult another sage who might declare it as clean. If one sage declared something as bound, he should not ask another sage who might declare it loosed. If two sages are both present and one rules something unclean and the other rules it clean, if one binds and the other looses, then if one of them is superior to the other in learning and number of disciples, follow his ruling, otherwise follow the stricter view. Rabbi Yehoshua bar Karka says, when it comes to the laws of the Torah, follow the stricter view, but when it comes to the laws of the scribes, follow the more lenient view. Rabbi Yosef agreed. The halakha is according to Rabbi Yehoshua bar Karka. B. Avodah Zarah 7a. In the days of the disciples, the Sanhedrin had the ultimate authority to make decisions of binding and loosing. The Torah and the Master both endorsed that authority. In the Messianic era, King Messiah will give the keys to the kingdom and the authority to bind and loose to Simon Peter and the disciples. In this current era, he gave them the authority to make judicial decisions for the community of his assembly. They exercised the authority as they transmitted the teaching of Yeshua and practically applied it to the assembly of Messiah. On one occasion, they used that authority to override the orders of the Sanhedrin, and on another occasion, they loosed the Gentile believers from circumcision and the yoke of the whole Torah, but bound them regarding things sacrificed to idols, blood, unslaughtered meat, and sexual immorality. The power to bind and loose, however, never extended so far as to nullify the commands of Torah or create new commandments. The authority of the sages and apostles only went so far as to interpret the application of the existing commandments. For example, neither the Sanhedrin nor the disciples had the authority to loose Israel from keeping the Sabbath on the seventh day, nor could they bind them to observe a different day of the week as Sabbath. Now you're getting it. Tell no one. Then he commanded his disciples that they must not tell anyone that he is the Messiah. Matthew chapter 16, verse 20. He warned his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Why? What was that not the whole point of his proclamation? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. The Messianic expectations of the Zealots, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Herodians threatened to compromise Yeshua's mission. Contrary to popular expectation, his messianic mission did not entail a revolution or military plan for world conquest. Not yet. Rather, he was destined to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things, be killed, and be raised up on the third day. Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. If he openly declared himself the Messiah, his arrest and crucifixion would come faster than he wanted. In order to carry out his strange goals according to his timetable, he needed to keep his true identity concealed.